Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the profound, deeply emotional, and frankly epic historical narrative found in Surah Yusuf. We're going to be focusing specifically on this incredible interplay between intense human grief and ultimate divine providence. It's a story that operates on a massive, sweeping scale, but at the same time, it's anchored by some truly raw psychological realities.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the depth of a father's grief, explore the paradox of prophetic love, walk through the trials of Yusuf, and finally uncover Allah's prevailing plan. Okay, let's kick things off with part 1, A Father's Grief, A Prophet's Sorrow.
So we're actually jumping right into the middle of the narrative here because it's just such a powerful emotional anchor. The text vividly illustrates Prophet Yaqub losing his eyesight due to the sheer crushing weight of sorrow over his missing son. After facing a second major shock involving his children, the text tells us he simply turned away from them. The constant, relentless crying and that immense internal pressure of his separation from Yusuf actually caused his eyes to turn white, meaning he literally lost his eyesight, or at the very least, it became severely weakened. It's a heavy, heavy moment.
To really wrap our heads around the depth of this emotion, we have to look at the specific Arabic term used in the text, qasm. It comes from qasm, and that the seer explains that his heart was so entirely filled with sorrow, so completely choked up, that his tongue was tied. He was rendered utterly speechless. He couldn't even share his agonizing pain with anyone else. He simply carried this monumental burden entirely within himself. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer duration of his physical suffering. The tafsir authority Muqatil points out that this specific state of blindness and intense, silent grief continued for 6 straight years. 6 years! But his overall separation from his son lasted much, much longer than that. And this immense duration of suffering sets the perfect stage for a really fascinating question.
Which leads us right into part 2, Prophetic Love, a spiritual paradox.
Now, you might be wondering, and it's a completely fair question, how does a man of God reconcile such an all-consuming earthly heartbreak? According to the source material, a prophet's heart is meant to be filled only with the love of the hereafter. The text explicitly states that wealth and children are a trial, and that prophets are chosen specifically to specialize in the remembrance of the hereafter. So, decades of weeping over a child? It creates a really fascinating theological dilemma.
So, here's the crucial distinction. Yaqub's extraordinary love wasn't merely a worldly attachment, or what's known as the love of dunya. As the Tafsir explains, drawing on the research of Hadrat Mujaddid al-Thani, loving things in the world that relate to the hereafter actually falls under the love of the hereafter, or akhirah. Yusuf's excellences weren't just physical. Yaqub loved his prophetic chastity and his incredibly high morals. Therefore, his love for his son was in reality a love for the hereafter itself. It's a completely different level of attachment.
But even though this love was spiritual, it still had a worldly touch to it. And the text explains that this attachment became the source of a massive, divinely orchestrated trial for both father and son. Get this, the separation lasted somewhere between 40 and 80 years, decades. And you might think, why didn't Yusuf just send a letter home when he finally gained power in Egypt? Well, commentators point out that Allah prevented Yusuf from sending any news through divine revelation. The trial was intentionally stretched to its absolute limit. Moving on to part 3, the trials of Yusuf, a path of hardship. Now that we've explored the emotional anchor of the father, let's zoom out to the sweeping historical narrative of the son. Talk about a roller coaster. This condenses decades of extreme volatility. Yusuf goes rapidly from the dark, terrifying bottom of a well, betrayed by his own flesh and blood, right into Egyptian slavery, where he's sold for just a few cheap silver coins. From there, he's cast into a prison cell. And ultimately, against literally all human odds, he ascends to royal power in the palace. The absolute turning point of his trial in Egypt is captured perfectly here. It really highlights Yusuf's prophetic chastity. When the chief minister's wife locked the doors firmly and actively tried to seduce him, Yusuf immediately sought refuge in Allah. Even though his torn shirt proved his innocence from the back, establishing that he was the one trying to get away, the corruption of the household meant he was imprisoned anyway. He literally chose the darkness of a dungeon over moral compromise. Incredible.
So he's sitting in prison for years. But then Yusuf's divine gift of dream interpretation comes to light. The king experiences this highly symbolic, confusing vision that none of his top advisors can figure out. He sees 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 skinny ones, and 7 green ears of grain right alongside 7 dry ones. And Yusuf doesn't just say, hey, here's what your dream means. No, he translates it into a brilliant, highly actionable 14-year agricultural master plan. He advises planting for 7 years, storing the harvest safely in the ear to prevent rotting, enduring the subsequent 7 years of devastating famine, and then awaiting the year of abundant rain. This incredible display of wisdom and divine knowledge immediately elevates him to a position of supreme trust and power in Egypt. An absolute game changer. And that brings us to our final section, Part 4, Allah's Plan, the Ultimate Design. This is where human plotting violently collides with divine knowledge. Honestly, if you take away just one single thing from this explainer today, let it be this verse. It acts as the theological backbone for the entire narrative. It directly contrasts the malicious jealousy of Yusuf's brothers, who threw him in the well, and the deceptive plotting of the minister's wife who had him jailed, with an overarching, unstoppable divine design. Every single human betrayal was merely a stepping stone in Allah's ultimate plan. So the ultimate question is, how does the loop finally close? After years of the very famine Yusuf predicted, his brothers are forced by desperation to travel to Egypt to seek green. And so, the dramatic climax of the narrative begins to unfold right there in Yusuf's royal court, with the brothers standing entirely oblivious before the boy they once discarded. It's the ultimate dramatic irony. Yusuf recognizes them immediately. They, however, have absolutely no clue who he is. Acting under divine revelation, Yusuf orchestrates a remarkably tense sequence. He slips the royal measuring cup into his younger brother Benjamin's bag. When the caravan is searched, the cup is found, allowing Yusuf to exercise his authority to legally detain his brother. This inflicts yet another, temporary, crushing shock upon his father Yaqub, but it's all to flawlessly fulfill the divine decree. And this brilliantly peels back the curtain on reality. The text tells us plainly, Yusuf couldn't have detained his brother under the king's normal laws. It was specifically allowed because Allah had willed it so. The entire epic, from the dark bottom of that well to the locked doors of the minister's house, to the isolation of the prison, to the planted royal cup, was a meticulous mechanism of ultimate divine wisdom and grace. It's like a giant, flawless puzzle. To wrap up this explainer, let's bring it back to us. I want you to reflect on how these timeless lessons of suppressed grief and unwavering faith might reframe your own modern trials. When we feel like we are completely stuck in the depths of our own wells, can we trust that the one all-knowing is orchestrating a master plan for us? Thank you so much for exploring this profound narrative with me today. Keep learning and keep reflecting.